Welcome back to another episode of A Legal Studies Teacher Reads the News. If you can hear a faint tapping in the background, that is a jackhammer that is just up the road and is such a great sound. Fantastic. But I've got the headphones in. Hopefully it's just my voice that you guys can hear. I want to look at two different articles today that are both about money. This is from September 22nd. Happy birthday to Bilbo for those Tolkien fans out there. This is about a grant given out to a football club, Panthers Group, and also about the government buying an airport, some land for an airport. I thought it would be good for a law and practice unit, thinking through concepts of kind of this question of the development reform of law, no, not reform of law, I should say. Probably effectiveness of legal and non-legal measures in achieving justice for society. I would say is probably going to be our most common theme here. And it's thinking through this concept of evaluating the effectiveness of the legal and non-legal responses to an issue. And for me, this issue is how the government chooses to spend funds. Note, and this is something that needs to be hammered home, when the government spends money, it's your money. All the government does is collect money from taxpayers and then it spends it. So whenever the government's spending money, there needs to obviously be a whole bunch of processes in place so that the money is spent as efficiently as possible, as effectively as possible, and is not wasted. So that's part of what we're looking at today, as well as that money should be going to things that are kind of evidence-based. So, if it's money towards education, well, are we actually putting it into programs that have proved to work, or is it if it's money going to a development program, is that the best community program for the community? So this is an example: $11.4 million in community sports grants spent on a car park. Cracking start there, Nigel Gladstone. Let's see what happens. What started as an election promise for federal and state governments to pump millions into community sport through the Panthers Group, so the Penrith Panthers, this is Western Sydney, has ended up building an underground car park that cost taxpayers $11.4 million. And the remaining taxpayer millions that began as a sports centre and morphed into a function centre are now on hold indefinitely, after a Herald investigation revealed the purpose of the grants had been changed. The club won $12 million in grants from the federal Labor government in 2013 and $12 million from New South Wales Liberals in 2015. Announcements about the grants were made close to the 2013, 2015 and 2019 elections. 4 days before the 2015 state election, Penrith MP Stuart Ayres, so remember, he's the MP for the Liberals, stood with then Premier Mike Baird to announce a half share in a $24 million grant to build indoor sporting facilities like we've never seen before. I don't know about you guys, but he's probably right, isn't he? I've never seen indoor sporting facilities that look like a car park before. But after the election, Panthers Group, which earned $66 million in revenue from poker machines in 2018, said it was not financially viable to build an indoor sports centre. So that's Nigel there, giving us a little hint that he thinks, in fact, Panthers Group could afford this. Instead, he proposed the Western Sydney Community and Conference Centre, the WSCCC, which included a hotel, service departments, and parking for 500 cars underground, estimated to cost $88 million in total. The Herald revealed earlier this year that in the lead up to the 2019 state election, Mr. Ayres, again, pushed for the $12 million grant with no relevance to his portfolio to go to Panthers. They leaked, those documents leaked confirmed that. A month before the 2019 election, Mr. Ayres announced the turning of the first sod on the WSCCC with Deputy Prime Minister Michael McCormack. In response to questions from the Herald about the status of the project, Panthers Group CEO Brian Fletcher said it is presently in discussions to delay building the WSCCC until a vaccine for COVID-19 is found, and Panthers Group is back trading at full capacity. New South Wales Labor spokeswoman for sport, Linda Volz, said the New South Wales grant was questionable from the start. Not only are we now getting the sporting facility, not getting the sporting facilities, but it looks like the community centre is on the chopping block, Ms. Volz said. It's time for the member for Penrith, Mr. Ayres, who personally pushed this grant, to explain exactly what the public, whose money he has handed over, is getting. A spokeswoman for Mr. Ayres referred questions to New South Wales Minister for Water, Property and Housing, Melinda Pavey, whose spokeswoman said Panthers have received $8.4 million in grant funding so far. Panthers Group has advised the New South Wales government that due to the financial impacts of COVID-19, the project has been placed on hold, she said. The balance of the grant will be paid pending construction milestones. The federal government remains committed to delivering the WSCCC via the Community Development Grants Program, a spokesman for Mr. McCormack said. So far, $3 million of $12 million of federal funding has been paid, he said. The Australian government will continue to work closely with the grantee, Penrith Rugby League Club Limited, to appropriately revise the delivery timeframe. A worker on the project who wished to remain anonymous said the builder, Richard Crooks, was told to complete the car park before Christmas. We've been instructed to build the car park as if the hotel is being built at a later date, the worker said. Richard Crooks referred questions to Panthers. What's happening here? What seems to happen is we've got these amazing promises that are being made. Here's all this money going, and there's going to be a community sports centre. And so it seems funny that these announcements are being made just before elections. Just before elections, they're being made 4 days before the 2015 state election. Good times. And so the question you've got to ask yourself here is, well, resource efficiency. What's happening here? Is this an effective and efficient way of spending government money? Is this what is needed? Or could that $11.4 million have been spent somewhere else? I mean, it's great to be able to park cars and 500 at once, fantastic. But this is the question that needs to be asked. Should this money have been spent perhaps on something else, or just not handed over at all and not being collected from taxpayers in the first place? So it's this question, and you often see this all the time, this question of government grants. You could even do an issue about it if you liked for this Law in Practice, this question of all these grants, because if you have a look at Mr. McCormack, he's had some lots and lots of interesting questions in one of his grant projects about giving money away to electorates that just so happen to be really tight when we come up to elections. So it's this question of, is that resource efficiency, responsiveness, is it meeting society's needs? All of those questions need to be asked about that. Another example of taxpayer money being spent, and you asking the question, how has this money been spent? This is Matt O'Sullivan. This is yesterday, September 21st. The federal government has been castigated, wow, cracking word there, for paying a dairy farm operator 22 times more per hectare for a parcel of land abutting Western Sydney Airport than what its state counterpart did for its own slice of land of what's been dubbed the Leppington Triangle. The 12.26 hectares in question at Bringelly were bought by the government or the Commonwealth, I should say, for almost $30 million in July 2018, with the aim of eventually using it as part of the airport's second runway. Less than a year later, the Federal Department of Infrastructure's accounts revealed it valued the land at $3.065 million, just a tenth of the price it paid Leppington Pastoral Company. You've got to ask a bunch of questions there, don't you? As a taxpayer myself, I have to ask myself, what on earth is my money going to the federal government so that it can pay 10 times more for land that will only be used for a second runway in like a decade or 2 decades' time? It led to an audit by the Federal Auditor General, Grant Hare, who has found the department failed to exercise proper due diligence in its purchase of the dairy farming land, and that aspects of the agent's operations fell short of ethical standards. Okay, so here we're seeing government process taking place. The mechanisms of achieving justice is we have auditors that go through all the decisions that the government makes and says, hang on a second, you didn't do this the right way. His report, released on Monday, also determined that the department's valuation approach inflated the value of the land, which led the Commonwealth paying more than was proper. In fact, the Commonwealth ended up paying 22 times more per hectare than what the New South Wales government paid for a 1.36 hectare slice of the Leppington Triangle needed for a realignment of Northern Road, which is a key north-south link. So what they're saying there is New South Wales government got a nice kind of deal on theirs, and the Commonwealth government comes in and pays a lot more. The Auditor General also found the department's acquisition strategy was focused on incentivising an unwilling seller to dispose of its land some 32 years before it was expected to be used. The farming land next to the 1,780 hectare airport site became known as the Leppington Triangle because of its shape. Upon buying the land, the Commonwealth leased it back to the dairy operator for a decade with options to renew the lease for a further 10 years. The land was valued at $920,000 for lease back. In other words, let's get this right. Thinking about this from the point of view, and this should make you angry as a taxpayer. The government has bought this land for 10 times what it's worth, with very, very close by land, the New South Wales government paying 22 times less than they did. Then, and this is 30 years before it's needed, then it has leased it back to the people that bought it for $920,000. Wouldn't that be great if someone came to your house, bought it for 22 times what it's worth, and then allowed you to rent it and keep staying there because they needed to use it in 30 years' time? Incredible. A consequence of the decision to lease the land back was that a road underpass needed to be constructed to allow farm vehicles and animals to pass between the Leppington Pastoral Company's main farm and the Leppington Triangle land. Years earlier, the federal government had agreed that if the Northern Road was rerouted, it would construct a tunnel or other carriageway under the road. In mid-2017, the federal department instructed New South Wales Roads and Maritime Services to include an underpass in the design of the Northern Road for the farm owners' use. That's very kind of them, isn't it? According to departmental records from early 2016, the underpass was expected to cost about $10 million. Wow, that's very, very nice of the government. The Audit Office sought details of the cost, but the Department of Infrastructure advised in June it did not have separate figures for the underpass. This is the kind of thing that you read, and if you think about it, you want to ask yourself, how convenient is that? The Audit Office sought details of the cost, but the Department of Infrastructure, i.e. the government, advised in June, sorry, we just don't have separate figures for the cost of that underpass. Why not? Surely the government should have exactly what each section of road and underpass and bridge costs. Or is it simply that it's a relatively convenient excuse to give because you don't want the Audit Office to find out how much it costs? The Auditor General also highlighted in his report that ministers and other decision makers were not properly advised on the land acquisition, as formal briefings omitted key information such as the purchase price and that it exceeded all known market valuations. Wow. In its response, the Department of Infrastructure said it was concerned by the report's findings and was taking action to fix any shortcomings in the processes and decision-making arrangements. The department has agreed to all three of the Auditor General's recommendations, including that it prepare balanced analysis of the benefits, costs, and risks of proposals to spend public money. So you've really got to think about when this question is asked, how has our money been spent here? Who is making these decisions? Who is okaying $30 million for land that is literally a year later valued at $3 million? And the question when you're thinking through evaluating effectiveness is, when it comes to responsiveness, obviously the response of an airport coming in 30 years' time, this government said, well, we need to make sure we get land for it. And so part of their response is to buy the land and then lease it back to the farmer at a stupidly reduced rate for 10 years. What's the point of buying it in the first place? And on top of that, you've got this question of they're kind of building underpasses for this farmer to move from one place to the other. So lots of questions to be asked there, and it becomes a question of government process. And one thing you can often ask yourself in this kind of day and age when you're thinking through is, what would happen in a company? What would happen in a company if your department, say a big developer, bought a parcel of land and you paid 22 times too much for it? A very, very good question to ask. And that's all today. Some very big questions to ask of the government, and good to think about when it comes to preliminary legal studies for resource efficiency and the effectiveness of government responses.